What's up guys, today we will be driving this 2019 Volkswagen Golf R of the Mk7.5 generation. I've driven a pretty much stock, except for an engine tune, Mk7.5 Golf R in the past, and between that car and the Mk6 Golf R and the Mk8 Golf R, I've always found the Golf R to be very soft around the edges. It's a very well-rounded car, great for daily driving, high quality interior, comfortable, good creature comforts, and you have that all-wheel drive, all-weather capability, and a punchy 4-cylinder turbocharged engine. But when it came down to comparing it against some of the other front-wheel drive and all-wheel drive hot hatch or compact options in the sub $50,000 price range, the Golf R always kind of fell short in terms of sharpness. An FK8 or FL5 Civic Type R, for example, is a much better handling car in my opinion. So is the Hyundai Elantra N. But this car has potential. With the all-wheel drive system, the turbocharged engine, the fundamentals are there, but I always wondered what could be done in the aftermarket. So that's what we're going to find out today. The owner, Bada, has thrown a huge list of mods at this car. Let me go through a few of the highlights here. We have a Wavetrac LSD on the front, a bunch of chassis stiffening pieces from TBPerformance, upgraded intercooler, a catted downpipe, cold air intake, turbo inlet pipe. We have an integrated Engineering ECU tune and DSG tune because this car does come with the 7-speed dual clutch transmission. The pre-facelift Mk7 had a 6-speed, and we have a bunch of parts from 034. Their dynamic plus lowering springs. For wheels and tires, we're on Koenig Hypergrams 18 by 8.5. and we're running Michelin PS4S tires, 245/40/18. Bada mentioned that with the bolt-ons and tune, this should be making close to 400 horsepower at the crank. These 2-liter turbocharged engines, when stock, made about 280 to 290 horsepower. Of course, compared to a regular GTI, which has a similar EA888 engine, the Golf R version has a lot of upgraded internals, modified cylinder head, exhaust valves, pistons. The Golf R has a Haldex all-wheel drive system, so it's primarily front drive based, but it can send up to 50% of engine torque to the rear axle. Under low load conditions, like if you're just cruising on the highway, the car is pretty much front wheel drive. It should weigh around 3,400 pounds. We have electric power steering. Really like these aftermarket paddle shifters. I've always felt that Volkswagens and Audis, the paddle shifters are always too small and feel plasticky and flimsy, so this is definitely a nice upgrade. Startup is pretty mild. Nothing too crazy in terms of the engine sound. This car does come with adaptive dampers as standard, which work with the 034 lowering springs. So we're gonna hit the mode button and put this into race mode. All right, modified Mk7.5 Golf R. Let's see if it's really that much better than a stock Golf R and how it compares to cars like my Integra Type S, for example. Yeah, that's a very, very healthy amount of power. For a stock engine, just bolt-ons and tune, that's really, really impressive. Lots of low-end torque, just a little bit of turbo lag. Nice and short gearing from this 7-speed DSG. Woo. You can build speed really quickly with this car. Wow. Stock brakes feel really nice, easy to modulate that pedal. Oh yeah. Lots of grip. Look at that. This car just puts the power down coming out of corners. No drama, no fuss. It just hooks up and rockets you out. Suspension is on the firmer side in race mode. I'm sure these lowering springs firm up that ride quite a bit also, but it's not bad. It's still manageable out here in the canyons. Now, when you're lower in the rev range or in the mid range around 3,500 RPM, the throttle response isn't as linear as I would like. It's a little bit touchy. Let me try putting it into drive instead of sport and then putting it back into manual. Let's see if that actually does anything. The 7-speed DSG with the tune actually is really impressive. Nice and snappy shifts, both on the upshift and the downshift. A little bit of lag. Look at that. It'll rev out to 7,000 RPM. No problem. Automatically downshifted. Do not like that. Let's put it back into sport and then back into manual. I hate when manufacturers design their automatic transmissions that way. You put it into manual mode, but it'll still do its own thing when it thinks that it should. This has upgraded pads and rotors. That explains why the brakes feel so good. The thing I love about this car is that even with all these mods, which do make it a lot sharper, I will acknowledge that, the car's fundamental feeling of stability that it gives you is still very much there. The all-wheel drive system, even though it's front drive based, it still does a great job at keeping the car composed. Now the more stock Golf R Mark 7.5 that I drove on track several years ago, that felt soft and it definitely defaulted to understeer. This one, at least at canyon speeds, feels a lot more light on its feet. This little 2-liter turbo, it's an engine that's been around for so long, but still feels so relevant in terms of the power output, the torque delivery. Even the response is pretty decent. Not as good as the Civic Type R engine, but for such an old engine, this is really impressive. The steering feel is not great. It's pretty much typical Volkswagen Audi product from the era. Not only does it not have a ton of feedback about the road surface, but it also just has a slight, how should I describe it, just soft around the edges feel. Feels like my steering inputs just take a couple of milliseconds before the actual front end responds. It's very, very subtle, but because I've driven so many cars in this sort of sub $50,000 segment that are front wheel drive or all wheel drive, the steering of this car is one of its weaker points. But everything else, I would say this car does really, really well. The transmission, the engine, like I mentioned, the brakes, even the suspension, like I said, it's a bit firm, maybe for daily driving, but out here, feels pretty good. Minimal body roll. The engine actually revs out to 7,000 RPM. Not sure if that's due to the tune or even in stock form. I do sense that it's losing steam a little bit towards the top end, but you can definitely rev it to 6,500 and not feel like the engine is gasping for breath. Overall, just really well-rounded and enjoyable car to drive. How I would sum this car up is that it is not necessarily as sharp as a Civic Type R, even in stock form, even with all the mods, but it does get much, much closer than a stock Mark 7.5 Golf R. And at the same time, it retains some of those qualities of the Golf R that give it a big edge over something like the Civic Type R. Namely the all-wheel drive system, the nicer interior, and just the fact that it's so confidence inspiring to drive. Coming out of every corner, you can mash it earlier than you would think, and the car just hooks up. Try doing that in a Civic Type R and you're just gonna wheel spin or torque steer off the road. So big shout out to Bada. Let me know what you think about the Mark 7.5 generation Golf R. What other mods would you recommend for him? I think the next big thing he could upgrade probably would be the suspension. I think the lowering springs with the adaptive dampers, it does a good job, but it is probably one of the weaker aspects of this car given everything else is at such a high level. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.